So you are listening to KXLU 88.9, broadcasting live from Loyola Marymount University. This is Gussie's Dream Corner. I'm very excited today to be joined by David Hilliard from the Slackers. And David, it's just you today, but if you want to fill me in on kind of your position and who else, who we're missing, I guess, it'd be great.
All right. Well, yes, I am the saxophone player for the Slackers, and the other members are Vic Ruggiero on piano, keyboards, vocals, Glenn Pine on trombone and vocals, Jason Nugent on guitar, and Marcus Geard on bass, and Ara Babajan on the drums.
Sweet. Not I as soon as I asked that, I realized you're a ska band, and that could be most of the interview. But
we're actually pretty tight. You know,
yeah, I was gonna say that's
a six piece for a ska band is pretty compact.
Yeah, that's not bad at all, for sure. Cool. So you guys just released an album, Don't Let the Sunlight Fool You. That's sort of on the heels of I believe 2016's Self-Titled was the last thing before that, correct? Okay. Which both of which I've listened to and are great. So kind of what, I mean, I did look at the, the gaps between all the albums. That's always an interesting thing for me with bands. Was there, when you released that Self-Titled in 2016, was that kind of, okay, we're going to take a break, or, we're going to work on an album? And, obviously there was a pandemic, so that'll add to a gap for sure. But kind of what was where did this album come from, I guess?
I get, when we got done with the Self-Titled, I think it was something, it usually takes us about 2 years to get the music for an album together. Back in the day, it used to take us about 9 months, but it's sort of taken us a little bit longer as we get older and such things happen. Because like back in the late 90s, we put out albums like 97, 98, 90, like pretty much every year.
Yeah.
But with as time goes on, it's always building up new original tunes, getting them together, learning them. We usually learn things on the road, and that was like the last albums was a whole bunch of tunes. It was like we had learned like and recorded like 20 something tunes for the last album, so it took a while for us to get going again. We'd been doing some singles here and there for the last couple of years, and then with the pandemic, we had just started recording some basic tracks for tunes prior to it, and then as the pandemic happened, we got everything ground to a halt with the touring, and we started doing live streams starting in the spring of 2020. Like I think May or June was the first one, the first full band one. And when we were there for the live streams, we were all set up at our sound guy's house/studio in New Jersey, and it was just before the vaccines, and we were all set up like in separate rooms and spaced out from each other, and so we started, after we did the live streams, we would record some tracks since we were all set up for it to record, and we were liking the way things sounded. So we'd be, hey, we got a tune. Who's got a tune? So like one of the first ones we did like that was Don't Let the Sunlight Fool You. We learned it pretty quickly, and then proceeded to get the rhythm tracks down. And the same with this, They're Losing. So those were two of the first, and those were recorded in the spring. And it was really, I think the lyrics of Don't Let the Sunlight Fool You are really like the mood of, it's warm outside, in getting warm outside New York, but we're still not in the clear, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, that was, I mean, New York was kind of the epicenter for a minute, which was scary.
Yeah,
And
I wouldn't wish what we went through on my enemies. So it was
yeah,
very bad.
definitely. And I'm actually it's something that I'm not a, a woodwind or a brass player, but it's something that I didn't consider, is that's maybe one of the worst instruments for, an airborne disease. So I think the commitment is very impressive, especially that quick into it. That's
Yeah.
like,
Well,
I don't.
I was lucky too that I had a friend. There's just like a lot of lucky coincidences, really. That made all this recording possible.
Mhm.
Like the fact that our touring sound guy had just moved into a bigger house than he normally
Yeah.
had.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Right before the pandemic, that had the space and he had all the gear. And we were able to, buy some of the cameras that we could do the live streams, And so he was set. So we had a place to go that was relatively safe that we could set up and do this in. It would have been a lot more complicated if we didn't have that space. And then I had a friend who was doing, he does like couture and expensive wedding dresses and various costume kind of stuff. And so he's, like clothing designer. So he started making masks during the pandemic. And I asked him if he could design me a saxophone playing mask, because I had an idea for a mask. And he was able to actualize it. He made it very simple, very effective. So I actually had a mask that was that I still have. I mean, but that was relatively safe. It protected me breathing in. It also protected people around me, breathing out on the saxophone. So, if you check out some of our live streams and various live shows from the last year, you can see me playing in the mask, and it was, yeah. So we were lucky to have people who could get us around the limitations that the pandemic put upon us, because being a wind player, it's like, yeah, it's literally you're huffing and puffing COVID on everybody. You don't think about it, or whatever, your moisture droplets are shooting out of the horn. And so I put a cover on the bell of the horn and had the mask, and then it's like the rest of the way, it's a little gross, but the way that the saxophones work is that the rest of it kind of dribbles out the keys. So the keys actually form a trap on the rest of the air themselves.
Yeah.
So
I was in middle school band. I was an alto player, so I am familiar with that part, at least. Yeah, no, that's really cool. That's like a really interesting kind of, it's a cool workaround, and I've definitely never seen a playable mask, so that's really cool.
Yeah, he made them. Yeah, so there you go.
That's awesome. Something that I totally didn't address at the beginning is that you guys were the preeminent kind of New York ska band in the late 90s. Have you been based in New York? And I get the sense you're based in New York now. Have you been based in New York kind of the whole time you've been together?
Well, the band, I was originally born in California, and I moved to New York in 1992. So I've been living there ever since. It was in the 90s, like the whole band, with one or two exceptions occasionally. There's always been people moving in and out, but the band started based in the city, and we would rehearse on the Lower East Side, and then in Brooklyn. There was at one point, I think when Red Light came out, most of the band was in Brooklyn.
Okay. And that's your debut album, correct?
Yeah. No, okay. Second album.
Second album. Okay, cool.
Yeah, Better Late Than Never was the first, and then Red Light was the second. But Red Light was the first with Hellcat, so that was the first one to get good distribution.
Yeah.
So yeah. So the band's been based out of New York City. You know, it's as you get older, people, you know, people move around, you know.
Yeah.
It's like right now, out of the six of us, you know, I live in Washington Heights in Manhattan. Jay lives in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy. Ara lives in northern New Jersey. Marcus lives in Westchester, just like 20 minutes north of me, but that's like a suburb.
Mm-hmm.
And Vic, you know, sort of wanders the earth. He's all over the place. And
Okay.
Glenn lives out actually closer to you in Long Beach,
Oh,
California, right?
sweet.
Yeah, but he's, you know, he was originally from Boston, so he was always the guy commuting in for rehearsals. You know, he's lived in New York here and there, but he's always wandering too.
Okay, cool. That's sweet. But yeah, so largely a New
Well,
York band,
New
but with
York's the
some.
base. New York's where we made, you know, first made our mark, and it's our base, it's our home, you know. But
Yeah.
as you know, like a lot of bands, as people get older, you don't, you know, sometimes people have this weird sense that the band's all like you guys all, we all live in the same house and we all went to
Yeah.
the same
Yeah.
high school or something, and it's like
Yeah.
that's not how it works, man.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you know, it's like you know, like the Rolling Stones are seen as being from England, but you know, half those guys, they live all over the place now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like,
Exactly. Yeah.
we're not even, you know, anywhere near that wealthy, you know. So it's like that's like people get spread out, just life happens, you know, and people move and spread out. But yeah, New York remains the home base. And yeah, and it's like Vic was here for the first couple months of the pandemic. He was in the Bronx, like, you know, 20 minutes away from me. So sometimes when we couldn't travel, we would walk to meet each other, you know, halfway.
Yeah.
You know, I walk north and he walks south, and we meet up and talk.
Yeah. That's
It
sweet.
was
Yeah, that is at least, yeah, my I mean, you guys are spread out all over New York City, but you know, it's like it's a surprisingly small city sometimes in terms of, you know,
yeah,
that
well,
stuff.
when you're in the city, yeah, because of the subways and stuff, yeah, it's easy to get around. Although
Yeah.
it was really weird, you know. It's like I learned a lot about latency
Yeah. Yeah,
because
I
we're
bet.
doing these lives. I mean, Vic, we the first thing we did together, we figured out a way for me to play along with him, and it was really, you know, pretty janky in terms of tech wise, but we figured out that that if he's playing in his time zone, right, which was the Bronx at the time, so
Mhm.
he's, you know, so the latency of his broadcast isn't that bad, but he's playing, um, you know, guitar and singing, and then we broadcast it onto my TV here in you know, via Zoom. He broadcast it onto my TV at in my house in Washington Heights. And so I was able to play along with him if he turned down the headphones so he couldn't hear me playing back. So it was like a one-way broadcast.
Yeah.
So he just knew to leave spaces for me. If he led the spaces, I could play along. And then we broadcast it out to everybody else on a second set. So it's like he came into my time zone, so there was no latency, and then I would play out to
Yeah.
everybody else. I mean, it was hard to mix. It was hard to get the volumes right,
Yeah, I bet.
especially because, you know, the signal wasn't like the strongest, so it goes up and down. But you know, it is what it is.
Yeah,
So
no,
yeah,
that's very ingenious, like workaround for sure. You know,
yeah,
it's, yeah, that's sweet. So yeah, I mean, that actually kind of answers a little bit my next question. But yeah, I mean, you guys have been around for a minute now, which I love
yeah,
seeing. And I'm
30
kind
years.
of curious. Yeah, yeah. Kind of curious how, I mean, okay, so maybe let's say the 2016 album, since we've kind of, this album was a an outlier, I think, in terms of recording. But kind of how has your, you know, I'm really curious about like what the first album, maybe the second album, Red Light, with Hellcat, how your recording process evolved from those early
Well,
days to, let's say
well, I mean,
2016.
those first couple albums were all on tape, you
Mhm.
know. We didn't do anything digital till the mid 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah, so everything, you get studio time, you book like five dates. We tried to be rehearsed, we tried to have tunes together, but it's like you have to go in there and you have to, you know, you only got so much time, you
Yeah.
know. So if a song causes problems, or we developed stuff like, like there's you only get so many passes at a solo.
Yeah.
Like it's like, or basically if you don't get it in the, I think you got like 5 tries at it in 45 minutes, and it's like if you don't get it, but then you got to tap out and move on.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
somebody
Time
else
is
is
money.
gonna take your solo. So it was like we it was, analog. We were like, we had Coyote Studios then, which was great. So basically our first 1, 2, 3, everything from Better Late Than Never till our 4th album, Wasted Days, was all recorded at Coyote. So that would be the most, we started with most of the band, the rhythm section in one room, horns, or sometimes just myself off in a side room. So we were isolated so we could redo stuff. And then, it's like, it was a tape, warm analog sounds that we've been
Yeah.
trying to maintain that standard ever since. Coyote was really like a good school for us. Albert and Mike were really good. They didn't know a lot about ska or reggae, but they learned really quickly,
Yeah.
and they were just into getting really nice, warm, pleasant sounds. And so we've tried to maintain that standard. That's sort of our standard for sounds, even though we do it different ways,
Yeah.
now. Yeah. And it's like the last album, the self-titled album, we tried to do some of it on tape, or combinations of digital and tape, or we passed stuff through tape.
Mhm.
And it's like we had a couple producers with us, Brian Dixon and Vic Axelrod, and then Agent J, our guitar player, has been doing a lot of the mixing for the last, I don't know, 10 years now. And we would go into studios when we learned, like, about 5 tunes, and we would lay down those 5 tunes, and then a couple months later we go in and do the next 5 tunes.
Okay. Yeah.
And so did it in blocks, and sometimes we had to do it around tour, just because we happened to be in places. Like with Brian Dixon, we recorded in Portland.
Oh, sweet.
uh,
I'm from
yeah.
Portland.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was my brain just forgot what the name of the studio was, but it was really a nice one. And then we did part of it in Brooklyn, and part of it, the rest of it was done, was the basic tracks were done in Brooklyn with that one.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I guess now I kind of want to get into the little more history of you, I guess, specifically. But did you like, what, I mean, what did, it's always a question that I like asking musicians, but like, what did you grow up listening to? Was ska kind of always on the radar? I know definitely ska, I think more than some genres I'm aware of, I feel like has very distinct, crests in it, especially through the, 80s, 90s.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, was ska always the goal? Was ska, the only thing
Well,
you listened to, or
I
what
I
was?
would say that, well, it's not the only thing I would listen to, but um, I'd say I'm a bit unusual,
Mhm.
uh, even in ska bands and amongst musicians. In that ska is what made me want to play music.
Okay.
Uh, so obviously I'd heard music and learned, listen to music, but hearing the two-tone bands, like a little bit past the peak, there was a mini wave in California. Like when the two-tone bands came out in 79, 80, they kind of fell flat on their face in the States. Whereas their peak was like when Madness had Our House or the Beat had Save It for Later. So it was sort of like a late two-tone. It took off in the States to a certain extent. And then I heard it on radio stations, like 91X, and it was popular in my junior high school, so that tells you how popular it was if junior high school kids are hearing it and getting into it. And it's like, so I heard it like, this is like 1982. And it was, I saw the Beat on the tour for Special Beat Service, and it's like I heard the sounds of the saxophone, and then that's what I wanted to learn. That's what I wanted to do. And so I learned saxophone from ska records, and then later got into Studio One and all the old Jamaican records. And a friend of mine's dad happened to be the Studio One distributor for San Diego. So I would go over to his house and just buy tons of, Studio One records and listen to stuff, and people give me tapes. And, so I was really into ska and reggae. And ska and reggae actually introduced me to a lot of American music that I didn't know about. A lot of old R&B, people like Roscoe Gordon, and just jump blues stuff in general, jazz stuff like Coltrane or Illinois Chiquette, and all these sounds, Latin music like Mangos and Maria. It's like ska was my gateway to music, and it inspired me to learn about other musics. So, but I said that it's like I'm a weird player. It's like I'm an American guy, and but I grew up, when I learned how to solo, it was over like Studio One dub records, and that's like my core. When I reach back, that's what I reach back to.
Cool.
Those are my deep reaches. Like if you throw me, say, play, my deep reaches are those old ska and reggae records. Whereas I think most ska and reggae musicians, they started learning how to play their instruments from something else, like some sort of rock and roll, or from the 80s or whatever, 60s rock and roll, or whatever was inspiring them at the time, or punk. There's so many people, but for me, my deep reach back is actually ska and reggae. That's my core.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear, because I'll be honest, I was sort of expecting, most ska musicians I've spoken to are like, I was into punk, I was in the, whatever, and then like I found the Specials, or I found whatever.
Horn players, it's always, I was doing jazz, or I was in band, and it's like,
and then horn,
right. And I love jazz, and I get into it, but I sort of dabble in it. I don't. It's my first influence was Jamaican players, like like Saxa from the Beat, and Tommy McCook and Roland Alfonso from the Scatolites. Those are like those are my guys. So
no, that's cool. That's like, that's sort of the answer I was hoping for. Is like, it's been ska from the beginning, which is really cool. And it sounds like, I mean, we were just talking about the kind of crests and the waves of it. Sounds like it hits you kind of right at the exact time, and you rode with that. So that's really cool to hear. So actually, it's funny that you mentioned Portland, because I was gonna bring up, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's ska band called the Crazy Eights that were like a little.
That's an 80s band.
80s. They were 80s. So actually, I'm in a band with the son of one of the Crazy Eights.
Wow.
and then Dan Schaffler, the tenor player as well in the Crazy Eights, was my my high school band teacher. So I was in.
Wow.
But they kind of, their stories, at least from when they were big, because they were like Corvallis, they were a college band, and then they kind of moved up to Portland. And I remember their stories kind of broke my misconception of like, oh, ska is like entirely laid back, entirely, very chill, because they had some rowdy stories. And I guess when you were starting out, was it kind of with, I'm curious, like, was there kind of a party mentality? Was it a little rowdy? Was it, that punk based kind of come off, or was it pretty relaxed?
Sorry about that. You just got me after party mentality. Someone called me.
Oh, okay. No worries. Yeah, I think just, was it rowdy? Were those fun shows for you to play, rowdy shows? Did you like more laid back?
I mean, it was, I mean, the shows, it was a weird time because in the 80s, by the mid 80s, ska was on a downslide. So there wasn't too many shows. And then it picked up again in the late 80s and early 90s. It's like there was these shows at Fender's Ballroom. I don't know
Okay.
if you are familiar with that in Long Beach.
I'm not, no.
Those were the crazy, really, those were crazy. I mean, those were just insane, but really underground,
Yeah.
And I was in this band called the Donkey Show. So in the 80s, we would play and we toured and play around. And then in the early 90s, I was in Hepcat for a couple of years when Hepcat was getting off the ground before Hepcat was Hepcat, like big, we were just playing like really small gigs. They got much more popular after I left. So go figure. But it was just a really intense scene. And yeah, the shows were very DIY. Yeah, it was people would put on shows at like different lodges. People would get a PA and put on shows, or people playing in garages or backyards, or and then the big shows were like Fender's Ballroom or the country club in Reseda,
Okay.
so what's that place that burned down? Crap. Is it in downtown LA? I want to say Variety Arts Center or something. It was a theater.
Okay.
Burned down
That sounds right. To be honest, I wish I am, if you want to talk about Portland, I got the venues on lock, but
Portland,
yeah, I gotta figure
Portland,
out
Portland. I didn't tour until the 90s with the Slackers. So I don't know. It's like, so I don't know anything about the Northwest other than like bands like the Crazy Eights are like contemporaries of the Donkey Show and stuff around the same time. I was aware because there were so few people doing ska at the time. And, there's probably, a couple dozen active bands. So, it was, you found out about people, anybody was doing it, you found out about it, even though there wasn't an internet, so you'd sort of hear about it. It was like new little fanzines or people passing around cassettes or compilations, and these were it was a completely different world.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that actually, because that is something. I mean, I've been an internet kid my entire life, but it's like, it's interesting how it didn't change all that much in terms of, it's quicker for sure to find bands and people that are doing what you're doing, but it's interesting that if you're making ska, at least in the West Coast, you're gonna hear about
I mean,
other
like
people.
some places helped, like Bleecker Bob's record store had a branch in LA and a branch in New York, and that was one of the main ways that bands from New York at the time, or the East Coast in general, like the Toasters or the Boilers or Bim Scala Bim, that we would hear about them on the West Coast, and I'm talking like 1987, So it's like we would get cassettes or their albums, and then the West Coast bands, like with Donkey Show, I gave my single to the guy at Bleecker Bob's to sell in New York, so it was like one of the ways that we could get stuff around. Everything was like, just slower. It moved by hand. People would give you a cassette and say, hey man, I heard this band, it's really cool, they're from such and such, check it out. And or one of your friends would get a hold of an album they found somewhere, and then everyone would tape it,
for sure.
So it was like passing it around very slowly. yeah, it was just a slower pace, and you had to be committed to have to be looking for it. If you didn't look for it, you weren't going to find it, because it was very underground. Nowadays, it's easier to find stuff. You can put searches, on Google, and all this music. It always blows my mind, and I forget that that's available. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this band. I only heard that one song. Oh yeah, they have a whole album up on YouTube, and
Yeah, I can listen to all of it now. Yeah.
Here's a live show from them playing it. Wow,
Yeah.
that's crazy. It's still novel to me. Like, you can do that.
Yeah,
I'm used to waiting for it to come around. It's like someone's gonna hand me a cassette. So
yeah. Even like streaming. I'm a Spotify man, but like, yeah, even every week I get a playlist given to me that's like, computer generated, but here's things that you probably like, and for the most part it's right. So it's like, it is really interesting how much easier it is to to get new music. So yeah, it's like, yeah, that kind of grind to collect what you like and what you want to listen to is really interesting to me.
Yeah,
for sure. So I think we're pretty close to wrapping up, but so I think kind of my last interview question, and it's one that I ask every band, and it's definitely for the most part, my favorite to ask. And for some, like, I mean, it's ska, so I'm hoping there's a good answer to it. But kind of I always ask what the first iterations of the name were, if you had anything before the Slackers, old, or even bands before the Donkey Show, or just what are the highlights of either really good or really bad band names?
I don't know. Okay, I'm just thinking the Donkey Shows are pretty terrible. Bad
Donkey
name.
Show's good. I like the Donkey Show.
It is bad. It's definitely bad. Yeah, and then our trombone player, he has a bad band name. He played in a band called Maelstrom.
Okay, yeah, that's
which
good.
I think was kind of like a 3-1-1, kind of like that. That funky rock with a touch of reggae kind of thing that was happening. That was very. It's a very 80s phenomena. Not very ska, like more like sort of even hip hop influence.
Yeah.
It was like funky. There was a funk virus in the late 80s that a lot of bands, Chili Peppers, got that happening.
Oh yeah.
So the funk virus swept through the music, and everybody's, or not everybody, but like 95% of the band sounded like the Chili Peppers at one point.
Yeah.
And then there was who else? What are some other band names that I'm trying to remember what some of the other band names. But Maelstrom is a personal favorite. That was a trombone player, Glenn's band. Yeah, and it's like, so I did the Donkey Show, I did Hepcat, Vic, and Marcus were doing this Sick and Mad, which was like their high school punk band that they still do sometimes. And then they also there was one point, I guess, when they started doing the Slackers originally, I joined like in late 93, and they did it somewhere in 92. If you talk to them, it gets older every year when the band officially started.
Yeah.
I think, now they're like, hey, 1986, I think. No, but the reality is probably somewhere 91, 92, but the name The Slackers wasn't being used. They kept using different band names, and it took them a minute to settle on The Slackers. Another band was The Nods, and it's just like, yeah, it took a minute for everything to get together. Yeah, but the other guys could tell you they're legends.
Yeah.
I view the legends with jaundiced suspicion, because they keep getting over the years, the number of shows they played keeps getting more.
Yeah. The notoriety in whatever town.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like,
yeah.
Sure it was.
Okay. Yeah. We'll get them on next time for sure.
Yeah, you can pick on next time, and you can ask him that question. He'll tell you all sorts of stuff. or
Sweet.
Marcus is definitely a good storyteller.
Cool. Looking forward to it. So at least on my end, on the LA end, you guys are playing the Regent Theater on May
That's right.
29th.
That's
And
correct.
I believe I will be giving tickets away to that closer
Awesome.
to the date. So that's for the listeners. Definitely keep an ear out for those. Is there anything, else that you want to shout out either in LA, outside of LA? Any last words, so to speak?
No, I mean, I just want to give, the LA scene a shout out, because LA's is had one of like the biggest and longest running ska scenes.
Mhm.
Like ska never got eclipsed in LA. It just kept on going, whether people were aware of it or not varied,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it just keeps on going. I'm always impressed by that LA always keeps generating, some kids in a garage playing some version of ska, and then they get out and they do gigs, and it always blows my mind. And just being so supportive of the Slackers for so many years. It's been a great city to play in for us. And so I hope that, people like the new album, and I hope they show up on May 29th,
sweet. Yeah, you guys better be there. And
Yeah, I plan on
yeah,
it.
yeah. This is KXLU 88.9, broadcasting live from Loyola Marymount University. This is Gussie's Dream Corner. I just had an excellent conversation with David Hilliard of the Slackers, who, like we said, are playing May 29th at the Regent Theater. And that's the interview. Thank you so much, David.
All right. Thank you.